Thanks so much to everybody who's joined today. Amazing in regards to the depth of people who we have here from all across the UK. That is lovely. So my name is Tahira. I'm sort of working with Elmbridge Cares. Just a very quick intro. It's an organisation which is looking to sort of increase the information and awareness of what we do as a UK government, but we're not funded by the UK government, sorry, I should say that. But yeah, so that's that one really, to tackle UK aid, which is there to tackle climate change and sort of extreme poverty. Just want to say this session is being recorded. I feel I've sort of sent that to you out already. If you do not feel you wish to be included, change your name, screen name, and also let me know with an email, and I'll make sure that if we if you do ask any questions, I can sort of quite easily edit that out. Yeah, so now I'm going to pass over to Jeannie from Elmbridge CAN.
Thanks very much, everybody, for coming. It's wonderful to see people from so many different places and kind of lots of new names as well as familiar ones. And thank you, Tahira, for organising this. I know there's been a lot of work. And huge thanks to Ahmed for coming along and speaking today. It's brilliant. Ahmed was somebody who spoke at our launch event, Elmbridge CAN's launch event, back in 2016. He had a massive influence on me, and I think on many people there. And I think, you know, he's gone on to do incredible things since. And I think, you know, it's not just us. There are so many different organisations and places, people that he's had an impact on since he came here, and all sort of it's all been about helping people understand the experiences of people like him, and I think, you know, that's an incredible achievement. So it's great that he's come back today. Thank you, Ahmed. So Elmbridge CAN, we're a small charity. Some of you are very involved. I know some of you have come from different parts of the country. We work to try and create a culture of welcome for refugees and asylum seekers. We're very community based. So what we try and do is, rather than kind of a few of us being in a little office and doing things, we try and involve the community. And we found through that actually it's just hugely beneficial for all of us. I don't think it's just beneficial for the people that we support. I think it's massively beneficial for those of us who try and help as well. I think we all learn a huge amount from each other. So it's highly recommended. If you are local, you can find out some more on our website. If you are not local, then I'm sure there are the organisations near to you that will be doing similar work. So I would recommend getting involved. And I think, so as well as the sort of practical support that we do, things like helping with language, helping with small grants, helping with integration, social support, all sorts of practical stuff. We also, as part of our charitable objects, we had to spend quite a lot of time kind of formalising our charitable objects, as anybody involved in a charity will know. And you have to be quite careful about those. But one of them is educating the public about issues to do with refugees and asylum seekers. And that's kind of the sort of part of the point of events like this. So that's partly why we do this sort of thing. And I know that, I think that there's, you know, those of us who haven't been through these kind of experiences, that there's always more to learn. But one of the things I'd also encourage those of you who are interested enough today to come along to do would be to find out a bit more and just speak to other people about it, because there are a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of misunderstandings, and I think, you know, we've all got a role in that, and I think it's important that we do our best to kind of, you know, to take that responsibility on, and to do our bit to just try and, you know, deal with some of those misunderstandings that you know, cause huge damage. And the other thing that I would want to say is that, you know, we've done a bit of trying, as well as educating the public recently, but we've been trying to do a bit of education of politicians, which again is something we have to be quite careful of, but it's very important. And I would say that you know, we are extremely fortunate here. You know, we all have a lot of power. We may not realize it, but here we are. You know, we're in this democracy. We have this power that many people in the world don't have. And I think, you know, we have a role there and a responsibility there to use it. Speak to our politicians. You know, we elect them. They want to stay elected. We may disagree with them. We may have our, you know, many different personal opinions about them, but, you know, that's not really the point. Kind of, there's stuff that's important, and don't forget that, you know, you've got some power, so use it. I think that's enough for me, really.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for making it to this session. My name is Ahmad Al-Rashid, and I'm originally from Aleppo, Syria. And the reason I've shared this particular clip is because I've been to every single place of these pictures we see. I have memories in every single place of these pictures before the conflict. And when I think about it at the moment, when I think back of Aleppo, I still cannot fathom. I still, in my mind, the way I still see Aleppo is the pictures before the conflict. I do not recognize the pictures of after the conflict, because in my mind, in the mind of many people who were forced to leave that country, it's still that beautiful place where peace, where people still love and care about each other. So for me, just to give a little bit background about myself, I am Syrian. I was born and raised in Aleppo. I'm coming from the countryside, the eastern countryside of Aleppo. So I was born and raised in a small village. I'm a village boy, and I lived my entire life in this small village, and life used to be quite peaceful, you know, quite normal. We took life for granted. We took peace for granted. We took everything for granted, and we really never thought that this would come, that this something will happen. Obviously, many people who were from outside of the country knew that something one day or something gonna happen in this country. But again, to go back kind of to share the personal kind of reflections of, you know, of this country, the one thing that strikes me is that it's this month, it's just over 10 years. It's 1 decade since this conflict started. And I remember the early days. It started by a group of people, Syrians, demanding political and economic reforms. And many people really, I think lots of people did not realize that this is going to go really bad. This is going to descend into one of the most bloodiest conflicts in the recent history. I mean, if I've just shared some of the stats about Syria, and these are really very difficult. These are really tragic stats. I mean, according to recent figures, out of 22 million people lived in Syria just before the conflict, we almost have got almost 500,000 people have been killed in this conflict, and around almost roughly 2 million people who have kind of suffered collateral damage. Almost you have around half of the country's population today are living outside of their homes. This is either they're living internally displaced within the country or outside of the country as refugees. And I remember my time in that country, the moment, the trigger. I was teaching English at that time because I was a student. I was about to graduate. I was doing a BA in English language and literature. So I was reading about and learning about Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales, and I was reading about Shakespeare and the Renaissance era. And when the conflict started well, the movement started in 2011, it was quite peaceful, but things started to escalate a bit by bit. And it was in February 2013 when I was teaching in my little village, when an attack suddenly happened. So this was, again, took the vast majority of people by surprise. And the town was split into two halves. So the first half was under the government control, the other half was under the rebels' control. And it was bombing, it was shelling, and it just like life turned upside down, like just like in a matter of minutes. And the way it happened, as I said, like I remember, like I had to, get out of that class. I had to go back to my family because my family was in the other half of the town. I was not able to get into the other half, so I had to get out of the town. My family fit to the other side of the town, and then I managed to reunite with my family, perhaps after a few hours. And at that time, my mom told me, please just get out of the village, just try to go somewhere else, because you are wanted to do the military service. Your education is almost done, because I was exempted from doing the military service because I was a student. So after I finished my exam, so there was no reason for my exemption from doing the compulsory military service in Syria. And I did not want to do that, because at that time I had views about that if I get involved in this, it's either I'm going to kill people or people are going to kill me. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to move away from the village for a few days from the town, until things improve, things calm down, things get better. And here I am, almost over, I live the home expecting that it's going to be maybe a week, a month maximum. And today we are in 2021 since I left my country. So I moved out of the country. I moved to Iraq. And I was based in Iraqi Kurdistan. So I worked with Syrian refugees mainly, who were fleeing the conflict in Syria. And I've seen, the difficulties, the challenges that people were facing at that time. Most of the people were living in camps, lack of food, lack of water, lack of sanitation. There were thousands of children who were, out of education. And again, being a teacher at that time, I started volunteering, and I started kind of giving some English classes to these children in these tents. Most of these tents were torn. It was really hard to control children because it was packed. But eventually, it was better than nothing. And then I managed to get a job. As I said, I got paid. I started working, supporting myself, supporting my family. And we started to work on improving the situation inside these camps in terms of health, in terms of education, hygiene in this. And there you could see the impact that the international aid was making at that time. So you had UNICEF, you had other UN agencies, you had also other international organizations working, and they were providing life-saving support to these people, because you're talking about, hundreds of thousands of people who were suddenly finding themselves out of nowhere, and they're refugees. There's no roof over their heads, no food, no nothing. And this kind of aid, this support was vital to many people. So I've worked about 2 years, just around 2 years with UNICEF at that time, until another crisis hit. So I was working near the city of Mosul when suddenly the Islamic State, ISIS at that time, attacked the city of Mosul. And this is, again, the things that I've witnessed there, particularly when I was near one of the Yazidi towns when ISIS attacked. And the stories that I've heard from the survivors, particularly women and children who survived the sexual abuse, the enslavement, the witness, the brutal killing of their loved ones. This made me realize that I just, I fled one hell just to end up another hell. I thought that this is going to be a safe haven for me until things, get better for me so I can go back. And it was during this time, after I worked with lots of survivors, that I realized that it's going to be really hard for me to stay here. Particularly, I started to expressing my views about, some groups, and they are extremists, and they are targeting, religious minorities or ethnic minorities. So it became a bit unsafe for me. And this was kind of the point where I decided I need to get out, because at that time, it was in 2015. I had a wife and a child. They were still back in Syria. I was not able to get out of Syria. They were in eastern Aleppo. And at that time, the government was closing on the eastern Aleppo, so bombing and shelling. And it was really hard. And I then decided to make the move. So I made a 55-day journey. I crossed from Syria, from Iraqi Kurdistan to Syria, to the border of Syria, to Turkey. Then I'm on a rubber dinghy. I made it to Greece. Then I with the help of a smuggler at that time, I got a passport. I went to a place called Marseille in France. Then with another smuggler, I went to Calais. I lived in Calais for a few days. Calais was a horrible place. I mean, I worked in many refugee camps in the Middle East, and they were horrendous. But Calais was just like a place, on a different level, a place of desperation. Lots of people. I've seen lots of children at that time living in this jungle. Safety issues, an awful, awful place. I've tried several times. There were several attempts, and eventually I've managed to cross into the UK, hiding in the back of a lorry, because back in Syria I didn't have a passport. I didn't have, I was denied. So I made it to the UK in June 2000. No, I think it was early July 2015. I came here as an asylum seeker. So I arrived in the back of a lorry, and then I was detained by immigration authorities just to establish my identity, who I was, and I was taken to Yarl's Wood detention facility in Bedford. But again, this was for a brief kind of, screening, interrogation to establish my identity, who I was. I then was dispersed to a place called Wakefield. I lived there very, very shortly. Was a dispersal area. Then I was dispersed to a place up north in Middlesbrough. So I lived for roughly about three months and a half. So this was again north of the country, in the northeast of the country, and roughly after 90 days, I was granted the refugee status. I received a letter, and I didn't have income. I was not employed. I got a letter that gave me 28 days. You need to get out of your property. So I started to go to landlords, asking them like if I could rent out. Like I needed a place to stay, and there was nothing for me there. So I was on the verge of becoming homeless after my 28-day passed. No money, no contacts, nothing. And this is something I went to Facebook and I put a call on Facebook like, guys, I'm gonna become homeless. Can anyone advise me what to do? And this was like a group of people like. Based in Epsom, a couple of people called a husband and a wife called Nina and Timothy. They called me out of the blue, like after they saw my Facebook on after they saw my message on the Facebook group, and they said, "Why didn't you come like live with us until like you sort out your life?" And they like helped me, like they even booked the bus, from Middlesbrough all the way to Epsom. I felt really strange, like living with someone's house, but it was an incredible experience because there I got to meet people, live with people. It was there for the first time in my life that I've seen people adding milk to their tea. So this was my first cultural shock, And again, I envisioned there's going to be maybe 2-3 days a week, but I spent almost over 5 months living with them. They went on a holiday to Latin America, to South America, and I was, staying by myself in this huge, massive house, not knowing what to do with it. And I think after that, they started a charity called Refugees at Home. There, through them, they managed to host thousands of people like me who were in a very difficult situation. And then I received the wonderful news that my family was granted the visa to join here in the UK. And it was a great moment, of happiness, but also it was a massive challenge because at that time I did not have a place to stay. I didn't know what to do. So it was really hard because Nina and Timothy offered me a place to stay, but I knew if my family comes, it's not going to be sustainable. And again, I was not able to find work at that time. Pretty soon afterwards, granted my status. And I was giving a talk at a church in a place called Wickham in Buckinghamshire. And after I gave a talk about the conflict in Syria, I had a couple of people who approached me and told me, we've got like a spare flat. We'll be happy to give it to you and to your wife until you sort out your life. And we don't need any deposit. We don't need any money. So the next day I went back from Epsom. A friend drove me all the way to Wickham. And I viewed the property. It was empty. It was literally nothing. It was a wonderful, like a 1-bed flat room. It was great. And we signed the contract. And like 24 hours later, they sent me pictures of their property, and it was fully furnished, even like, you know, with food in the fridge. And this was like an incredible moment for me, because like with less than 24 hours, you know, you've got volunteers, you've got incredible people, welcoming people, caring people who've managed, you know, to furnish the flat, to even put like, you know, hot warm food in the fridge. As you like, you walk into the house, like as if like, you know, this has been there for many years, like fully furnished. And I took my wife, you know, after my wife arrived, managed to smuggle out of Syria to Lebanon on a flight from Lebanon all the way to Heathrow. And then we went and we lived in that flat for over 2 years. And the support, the help was incredible. They managed, I was the first person that was kind of, you know, was brought up to Wickham. And after that, they managed to get lots of people, many families, Syrians and non-Syrians, who are currently living there. And soon after my family arrived, you know, I mean, that day, I will never remember that day, because I managed to see my wife, you know, and my child for the first time. And they were extremely tired after, like, you know, a few days of traveling. And I still remember that night when they went to bed, I was just like sat just next to them and just watching them, not worrying that they're not going to die from a shrapnel or a bombing or a shelling, where they're going to be kidnapped or raped. And I think that was one of the most happiest moments of my entire life. And soon, like a few weeks after that, I was offered a scholarship. So I did my master's in violence, conflict and development at SOAS, the University of London. So I was offered a scholarship, maintenance, was covered everything. So I finished my master's, and just before I submitted my dissertation back in 2017, I was offered another full-time contract. So I've been working since then, like over 3.5 years, working mainly with Syrian refugees who came here in the UK, trying to help them understand about life here in the UK, the challenges and the difficulties, but also kind of talking to different communities in the United Kingdom in terms of host communities, organizations, charities. And life has been incredible, because it is hard, because, I mean, for me, I never imagined that this would come. I mean, who would have thought that, you know, that this would come or this would happen to Syria? But again, life takes you to places you never know. You know, there are difficult things, there are incredible things. I mean, for me, it's really challenging. It's really hard. I mean, this is a wonderful country. It gave me sanctuary. It's got you know, a place in my heart, a place of safety. It's a place where my daughters go to school now. They spent over 5 years here in this country, and for them, the UK is their home. The UK is the place where they belong. And it's really a bit of a challenge, because for me, it's still like I grew up in Syria. Syria is still in my heart. It's part of my identity. But at the same time, the UK is my home. So in a way, I think we are quite lucky compared to the many millions out there who are really struggling, because we got to kind of to get the best out of two worlds, out of Syria, but also out of the United Kingdom. So we're in a very, very privileged position. And I think kind of reflecting over the past 1 year or so, we're here, particularly here in the UK, many of us would find ourselves like, the past year, how did it kind of, you know, how has it gone by? Like almost a year, people living at home, living in uncertainty. And if you really could think of this as the past decade or so, life has been something quite similar, and even like much worse for many people. At least in many of these cases, people have a home, people have, you know, water, people have food. But in lots of these cases, for many people back in Syria, this is still quite difficult. And this is something I've been working on really over a year. I've been part of a project called COVID Chronicles, you know, stories from the margins. And this is just to document the challenges faced by many people here in the UK who are refugees and living in really a difficult time. Because the challenge here, the difficulty is here is that I think this opportunity, like this pandemic, hopefully will kind of help. We would hope that would help some people understand what it means to live uncertainty, you know, living in a situation of uncertainty. It's been almost a year, and many of us, like I myself, I've struggled over the past year, like not seeing people, not being able to talk to people. I mean, for me, coming from a very sociable, like a very kind of sociable background, where I meet people on daily basis, like, you know, we meet and go and come. Coming to this country, which is still a bit, you know, more individualistic, it's been a bit hard. But I think this pandemic has been kind of like being a nail in the coffin in terms of still being able to go out and meeting people and socializing. And it's been really, really hard. So again, kind of to summarize, I think it's the situation is still overall, it remains very, very dire for many people. I mean, I was talking to a couple of people yesterday in Syria, and the situation within the country, I mean, there's still lots of, you know, problems. The bombing and shelling has stopped in many parts of the country. But for many people, I think it's the shock of after the conflict, where people realize the level of destruction, the trauma that's been caused by people. I mean, I was reading some of the stats yesterday, and when I left the country in 2012, 2013, the Syrian pound, like one US dollar was the equivalent of roughly 50 Syrian pounds. As of yesterday, one US dollar was the equivalent of 3,750 US dollars. And the vast majority of people are getting their salaries on the scale of back of 2012 and 13. And this has caused a huge, huge problem. I mean, I spoke to a couple of people, as I said yesterday, and one of them is like, look, I cannot afford anything. One of them said, look, I'm ready to sell parts of my body because I need to put food for my children on the table. I cannot afford it anymore. I spoke to another pastor, like, I've never had meat over the past 6 months, and the only thing I was able to afford is just to go bones, like bare bones, you know, for a stew, because this is the only thing I could afford. So I think the situation remains really challenging, very dire, despite the fact that we're still not seeing it in the news. And I think overall, I mean, reflecting on my own personal experience, I think there's been an incredible, incredible help and support and generosity from the people of this country. I mean, one of the examples has been, you know, if you look at the UK, it's perhaps, I think, if I'm getting it correctly, it's the second largest donor due to the Syrian crisis after, I think, the United States of America. And the other thing here in the UK, in terms of kind of a wonderful gesture of kind of generosity, is the resettlement scheme, where communities in the UK, local governments and communities, welcomed over 20,000, you know, Syrians over the past 5 years. So overall, I think the situation remains very, very difficult, very hard. But I think we all can have, you know, our part in helping. I mean, we cannot help every single person in Syria. The situation remains very difficult. But I think if we do our bit, I think that would make a huge difference. Because if you look at the bigger picture of, for example, these 20,000 people who've been resettled in the United Kingdom, the number is massive, the number is huge. But if you look, it's all small little pieces that make up the whole picture. So I encourage you to think about ways that you could get involved or help or support for Syrians or other Syrians, because it's not only Syria, you've got also other stuff happening other places, places like South Sudan, places in Afghanistan, places like in the Congo DRC, in Yemen, which is unfortunately one of, you know, unforgotten crises. So I think I'm going to stop here to open it for questions or any comments that you might have.
Thank you so much, Ahmed, for that. So insightful. Absolutely, a round of applause. So thank you very much for sharing your experience. And I guess sometimes each time you do that, in one way or another, you're kind of reliving it. And you did mention that how can we support, and obviously one thing which I feel quite proud of, actually, that as a government we do support countries around the world to try to lift them out of poverty, and that's called UK Aid. And more recently, people may have seen in the news, there was a leaked email within the Foreign Office, which talks about cutting quite drastically quite a lot of that aid. So in Syria, that's 67%. In Yemen, that's 45% was mentioned in the correspondence, but it's over 50%. We've now seen the other day, which was announced. Within Sudan, they're going to completely cut the budget for any conflict resolution which is going to take place. And these are really key locations around the world where actually, and out of, just so everybody knows, and you may know already, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, the budget is 0.7% of GNI, so gross national income. As our income goes up as a country, the support goes up. But as it goes down, quite rightly, then the support goes down, because as a country, we've still got to be strong, because when we're strong, then we'll obviously support people around the world. South Sudan was 110 million, is now going to be 45 million. And the bits at the sort of the top of Africa was 340 million, and now it's going to be presuming it'll be 23 million. So I think it's quite a lot actually, and previous MPs, prime ministers have said no, basically let's not do this, it's not the right time. So UK aid is used around the world to support people, lifting them out of poverty, sort of climate change, refugees, education, and all those various bits and pieces. And Ahmed, I think you've done some work and seen the impact of what UK aid's done on the ground. So are you happy to speak a little bit about that as well?
I mean, definitely. I mean, if there are things that are, I remember my time back in Iraq when I was working with UNICEF, working with other organizations that were receiving support from the UK government, from the Department for International Development, that was called, as it was called at that time, from DFID. Things like schools, water, sanitation, education for girls. And I think these are really vital things, because I think if we look at for instance, the future of Syria, I mean, one of the things that is quite bleak, so it's really quite scary, is that you've got millions of these children today missing out on education. And also because this aid is quite important, because if you look at the neighboring countries, for instance, if you look at their situation in Lebanon, a country of over 4 million people, where roughly almost 1 million Syrians are seeking refuge there. So there's roughly over 20% of the country's population who are made up of Syrian refugees. And Lebanon itself has been in a very difficult kind of economical, political, security, instability of the past several years. And I think it's the role of these kind of major players when it comes to the international scene to help and support this. Because for many of people think that this is something happening quite far away, that this is not gonna impact us, but we do realize that it's gonna have some impact on our lives somehow. If you look at the crisis in Syria, it was hardly kind of seen as kind of an issue for Europe, and it was a major challenge for the neighboring countries until late 2014, early 2015. We started to see some people crossing from the Middle East into Europe, that you suddenly realize that, oh, there is a crisis now. So because it's in the backyard of your home, then you realize that, oh, there is something happening now. And so I think being mindful of this, and I think continuing the help and support of these people is I think is quite important. I think if we look at generally the coverage of the refugee crisis, I think what lots of people get scared of is when you talk about stats and figures, faceless stats and figures. But I realized that the moment when you start talking like to individuals, to people, from a human to human, people realize that these are humans with hopes and dreams and aspirations. I mean, one of the examples that I remember, and this was my really early experiences of the UK, when I was living in the asylum accommodation in Wakefield. There was a group of the English Defence League protesting outside of that place, and I had no idea what the EDL was at that time. So I went out, I was talking to these people about, what's happening, like, can you explain to me? And it's like, these are rapists, these are terrorists, and these are blah, blah, blah. And then I picked up like a chat with one of these guys, and I started talking to him like, about like, okay, and what do you do? Like, it's like, which football team do you support, or what did you do, and what did you study, and stuff like that. So once you start having like these conversations with some people, it's really important. I think one of the thing that is, I found it quite sad, especially like this has been magnified with the social media, is like many people are kind of, we have this effect of kind of, echo chambers, that we've got the people that agree with us, so we kind of complement each other and we agree with each other. But it's also important, it's vital to listen to others who've got critical views, who've got opposing views, and recognizing that not everyone agrees with you, and having these conversations. I think it's important, be it on refugees, on asylum seekers, or any other issues. I think the first point, which is really important for many people to recognize, is that in the first place, the vast majority of these people never wanted to leave their homes. You never heard of Syrian refugees before 2010. No. Syria was like a country, like a destination for many tourists and other refugees, people fleeing conflict. And I mean, the reason behind why of these people, I would say in the case of the vast majority of why these people fled, is for political reasons, like security and safety reasons. There are parts of Syria that are completely destroyed. Like if you tell some people like, go back to your home, if you just Google some parts of Homs, some parts of Aleppo, they're completely destroyed. There is nothing. Like the infrastructure, according to a World Bank report back in 2017, they mentioned that almost around 25%, roughly 25% of the schools in Syria are totally destroyed or badly damaged. Almost, you're talking about more than 60% of the health infrastructure has been impacted. 80% of Syrians, and this is Syria before the conflict, Syria used to be a middle income country. Today, you've got over 80% of people are living under the poverty line. And the main reason
that, I mean, one of the things that annoys me most when people talk to me about, the work that I do with Elmbridge CAN, is when they say, and I saw this Syrian family and they just arrived and they had mobile phones. And I said, well, yeah, they were a middle-class family. They were like you and I, but in Syria, they left with, of course they had mobile phones. It was a very sensible thing to do, to bring them, because it gave them some lifeline of communication. Yeah, but clearly they don't need our help if they can afford a mobile phone. And the ignorant of this country seem to see that the only people that we should accept here are people who, come from a desperately poor background. Well, Syria was an intelligent country. It had a very large middle class. It's, to me, there's a complete lack of understanding of that. And I can imagine that it's going to be very difficult for an awful lot of people to go back, because, they've got to rebuild it.
Exactly. The same report mentioned that if the conflict stops tomorrow in Syria, the efforts to rebuild the country, the reconstruction, if there is a political will and international, kind of cooperation to rebuild the country, it would roughly take about 35 years to take Syria back to the point where it was in 2011. And again, you're talking about a lost generation. Like, you're talking about almost half, like currently around 6 million people outside of the country, and many people are living in a very desperate situation in Turkey. Like, lots of people are not able to travel, lots of restrictions. The situation in Jordan or in other, there are horrible situations. The situation is really hard, and the challenge for people is that they worry that if they go back and they might get arrested. You've got, according to some reports, over 200,000 people who disappeared, in prisons. So these are like valid concerns that people have, why they fled in the first place.
Go, Fred.
Okay, at Elmbridge CAN, in addition to the practical things we try and do with furniture provision and so on, we try and facilitate activities which will in some way provide people with everyday experiences which will allow them, in the words of one of the families we support, to become more themselves. So things like allotment provision, cycling, provision of cycles and cycling proficiency, cookery and so on. What have you experienced, both personally and working with Syrians in this country, that in their everyday lives have helped in some way naturally to promote the healing process, which can either be an alternative to medical interventions or a complement to them? What sort of everyday things have helped you, Ahmed?
I think that's a great question. I mean, obviously, there remains quite a lot of challenges. We recognize that many of these people have been through traumatic experiences, and many people are still very much attached to what's happening to Syria. So what happens there still having a huge impact on their mental health and their well-being. And one thing that I found quite helpful in the case of lots of Syrians is that the sense of community, like having people around them, is vital. And I think this is perhaps also this pandemic has highlighted how much it's really important, not only for Syrians, but also for the British people, like people not being able to see other has been a massive, massive challenge. So I think doing like practical things like, befriending, you might have challenges with the ESOL in some particular places, but having kind of, ESOL provided in an informal way, like as a befriender, you go, you teach people, you help people, helping people into kind of, understanding into employment. I think there's a very famous kind of Syrian proverb was saying, it's kind of, which kind of roughly translate into like, job is dignity. And this, like, getting them into employment is really, really crucial. It's really important. And this affects the mental health of many people, but also the self-esteem of many people. And particularly like when it comes to the power dynamics within the country, where you can see like the state kind of getting into kind of, supporting place, and some parents, particularly some fathers, are losing their traditional role of being the breadwinners and key supporters of these families or their own families. So I think overall, and it's really, it differs from one individual to other, from one family to other. But I think the focus, I would say, the most important thing for anything to be successful, I think, is based on language. Language is key. It might take a bit of time. We also recognize that some people kind of, illiterate, they cannot read and write, and also the sense of community, that you're welcomed, that you are supported, and also kind of, recognizing that being different does not mean being wrong. It's just like, it just means something else. It does not have to be criticized. In fact, it should be, I would say, it needs to be perhaps, celebrated and nourished. And perhaps another important thing also, using kind of them as role models, kind of, giving them more kind of a push to be independent. Because one thing that I've noticed with some of these support groups, that you tend to end up with creating kind of a sense of dependency, where the volunteers, the support workers doing a bit too much. And on the long term, this is really not quite helpful. You end up creating dependent families. So you need to give them kind of some control over their lives.
How is your family doing? It's a question which has come up. More people have asked actually than any other question. So how are you, and how is your family doing? So
yeah, I'm doing really well, thank you so much. My family is doing great. I said I've got two girls. One is almost 7, the other is 5. They grew up in this country. They go to school. Obviously, the past 2.5 months has been particularly hard doing homeschooling, like juggling several things at once. But I think overall we're quite privileged. We think we've been given an opportunity, and I think my girls and my family, I think we're grateful for this good opportunity. And again, I think like one story that I think, again, in terms of, it's just the complexity of the whole situation. This is kind of a short kind of, an incident that happened a few years back when I first took my girls. So we went on a holiday to Spain, and we were walking down one of these kind of, main roads in Malaga. We particularly chosen to go to Malaga and Cordoba because they were built by the Moors. So the streets of Aleppo, they're quite identical, I would say, to the streets in Malaga and in Cordoba and Granada. So we felt kind of, we are not able to go back home, but let's try something quite close to home. And we would do kind of, walking down one of these streets, and kind of, came across a hotel, and there were like different flags on the top of that hotel, to the US, the UK, and like other European flags. And my oldest daughter suddenly started, like, she pointed towards the UK flag, and she was saying, like, this is our flag, this is our flag, this is our flag, and my wife and myself, like we were kind of, we stood there for a minute. Like, it was like a moment of realization, like our children are growing up in a different country, in a different culture, and for them the UK is their home. Because for me, still, I identify with Syria, but it's just incredible how things, get really complicated. There are things it's just beyond your control. But overall, I think, yeah, they mourn quite a lot. They love their teas. So I would say they become kind of proper Brits, I would say, no offense.
That was very inspiring hearing from you. Could I just ask a question that perhaps is more for Tahira, but it concerns me a little bit when we stop aid. I'm all behind, I've worked in the third world sector for all my life. When we stop from being 0.7 to 0.5. On the other hand, I do wonder, because I don't know the answer, is if we're giving aid to war-torn countries and it only goes to governments, then maybe it's going to the wrong places, and we're right to stop it going to the wrong places. I certainly think it's right to stop selling armaments, but that's a bigger question. I just wondered if there's enough unanimity amongst different peoples that we could partner, our government. So that's why I'm saying this is a Tahira type question. If we could partner with other countries, the wealthier countries in the Middle East, and say, look, we'll give X if you'll give the same X. I mean, I don't ever hear of those countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, blah. Why would Saudi Arabia give money to Yemen? Yeah. I just find it very concerning that people are not helping themselves in co-religionist groups. But maybe they're not co-religionist either, because I understand all the different divides.
Yeah.
Do you get to the background of my question? I'd like to know the bigger aid situation.
Absolutely, well. and I will attempt to answer it. And if I if I don't do it incorrectly, I've got colleagues on the call as well, so they will absolutely chip in and either correct me or add value. So UK aid doesn't go to governments, and I think that's really
doing that.
Yeah. So what they're doing is it's going to organisations who directly provide that support on the ground. So there is a aid tracker, which you should be able to see where things are being spent, the kind of projects which they're doing, and even the partners which they're working in, because it's a chunk of money which is used. Obviously, it's a large chunk of money. So from a data point of view, they have to share the type of things they're doing. So it doesn't go towards governments, it goes towards projects which are taking place. And I just want to give you an example of how aid can be used and how it starts complementing the work which is happening on the ground. So when we use aid, sometimes we do the beginning bit and then the project continues. So as aid is being used, our aid money may be used to just focusing on health, to train local people so that they can use some vaccinations and they can make the impact, and then obviously they're sustainable, because that's what it's really about. And then what we haven't seen, and that's an element of raising awareness as well. So I think the fault also lies with other people to show this is what aid does and this is the impact it makes as well, right? But the bit we fund are getting people on the ground, various places around the world, and training them up so they can be nurses and sort of do vaccinations, for example. The other bit which comes in, which complements it, so it's kind of like putting £1 in, you get £2, if not more. I think somebody says when UK aid goes in, when you put £1 in, and you're gonna ask me for a reference and I won't remember where, it generates £5 worth of wealth. So what I mean by that is private companies are putting in, and they are the ones who are then providing the vaccines. So then the people who are trained can actually go out and do various things, if that makes sense. So it's the growth of what that does. If we stop the aid, we then indirectly stop all the other things, or it's just not as powerful as it could be. So that's it's kind of one way of just trying to explain sort of what it does.
No, gotcha. Sorry about messing about, but I was on low battery, so I just plugged it in.
Don't worry.
But I was listening to you, Tahira, and I look forward to looking at the links.
Yeah, and I'll send them out. And the development tracker is really useful. And the other thing, but do you know what? You're absolutely right to ask those questions, and I think they're the right questions to ask. And that is why it's important to have scrutiny on where this money's going and what is happening with it. So we should say that actually it should only be used for these type of projects. So education, health, sort of lifting people out of poverty, all that sort of stuff. So livelihoods, so which is about educating people so they can do their own thing. So I guess in our language is self-employment and running their own businesses. We should have that in place, and we as the public should be able to see that. That's why they've got a committee at the moment which do that, and what we don't want them to do is to scrap it, and that's what we'd encourage you to ask for as well. So there's a few asks, but obviously we're happy to support you to be able to sort of just get those asks going, and then kind of going, right, okay, this is what we're going to do.
So we all
also just to say, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It shows that if people dedicate 1 hour of their lives on a Saturday, to come to it, and means that people do care. So thank you so much. And also I'd love to keep in touch. So I'm on social media. Please feel free to reach out with any question, or if anything I could help with in the future, please let me know. And also I just want to say thank you so much for Tahira for organizing this, and also for Jenny and the incredible team at Elmbridge CAN.
They're amazing.
Phenomenal work. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah.